Writing. 3 people were murdered inside a quiet home in Jackson, Mississippi. 2 sisters. And a 2-year-old little boy who should have been safe in his bed. When police officers arrived just after midnight, they stepped into a scene that would leave even experienced investigators shaken. The house was silent, but the evidence told a terrifying story. Someone had entered that home with one goal: to kill. Before the sun came up, the killer was gone, leaving behind grieving family members, a stolen vehicle, and countless unanswered questions. But what really happened inside that house? Who would target an entire family? And what could possibly explain the murder of an innocent child? Before we get into today's case, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you never miss an upload from Crime Chronicles. Now, let's get into the story. Jackson, Mississippi, is a city with a long and complicated history. As the state's capital, it is home to government buildings, businesses, churches, and neighborhoods where generations of families have built their lives. Like many American cities, Jackson has faced its share of violent crime over the years, but every so often a case comes along that shocks even those who think they've seen it all. This was one of those cases. In the early hours of June 28, 2026, while most people in Jackson were asleep, a family was living through what would become one of the city's most heartbreaking tragedies. The home sat on Queen Alexandria Lane, in what neighbors described as a relatively quiet residential area. Nothing about that street suggested it would soon become the focus of a major homicide investigation. Then, shortly after midnight, everything changed. The Jackson Police Department received a report of an aggravated assault at the home. Officers responded as quickly as possible, expecting to handle what they believed was a violent incident. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. Inside the house, officers discovered 3 people suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. The victims were later identified as Erica Weathersby, her sister Keyana Weathersby, and Keyana's 2-year-old son, Camari Givens. Sadly, all 3 had died. The home was immediately secured as a crime scene. Detectives, crime scene investigators, and members of the coroner's office began arriving one after another. The area was surrounded with police tape, while officers worked to preserve every piece of evidence. For investigators, the first few hours after a homicide are some of the most important. Every footprint, every shell casing, every fingerprint, and every witness statement could mean the difference between solving the case or watching the trail go cold. So they moved carefully. Every room inside the home was photographed. Evidence markers appeared throughout the house. Investigators documented everything before anything was moved. Outside, neighbors gathered behind the police tape, trying to understand what had happened. Some had been awakened by the flashing blue lights. Others learned about the tragedy as word spread through the neighborhood. Nobody could believe an entire family had been attacked inside their own home. As sunrise approached, local news stations began reporting on the triple homicide. At first, many details remained unknown. Police had not identified suspects. There was no known motive. And investigators were releasing very little information as they worked to piece together the events of that night. Then another heartbreaking detail became public. One of the victims wasn't an adult. He was only 2 years old. The little boy was identified as Camari Givens. Parents across Mississippi struggled to process the news. Social media quickly filled with messages of heartbreak, prayers, and condolences for the family. People wanted answers. How could something like this happen? Why would anyone harm a child? As investigators continued processing the scene, Jackson Police Chief Rochelle Brackney later shared a detail that made the tragedy even more painful. According to investigators, Camari had been shot while he was in bed. That revelation stunned the community. Even experienced investigators described the crime as horrifying. The murder of a child is always difficult to investigate, but the circumstances surrounding this case made it especially emotional for everyone involved. While officers continued searching the house for evidence, detectives noticed something else. One of the family's vehicles was missing. A red 2020 Mitsubishi Mirage had disappeared. At first, investigators couldn't say exactly when the vehicle had been taken. Was it stolen before the murders? Did the killer use it to escape? Or had someone else taken it afterward? Those were questions detectives hoped evidence would answer. An alert for the missing vehicle was quickly issued. If someone spotted the car, it could become one of the biggest breaks in the investigation. Meanwhile, detectives began learning more about the victims. Erica Weathersby and Keyana Weathersby were sisters whose deaths left relatives devastated. For their loved ones, this wasn't just another headline on the evening news. These were daughters. These were sisters. These were family members whose lives had been cut short without warning. Then there was little Camari. At only 2 years old, he represented everything that makes cases like this so difficult to comprehend. He hadn't even begun school. He hadn't had the chance to discover his favorite hobbies, make lifelong friends, or dream about what he wanted to become one day. His future had been stolen before it truly had a chance to begin. As investigators comforted grieving relatives, they also had difficult questions to ask. When had anyone last spoken to the victims? Had they mentioned any threats? Were they having problems with anyone? Had anything unusual happened in the days leading up to the murders? Every answer was carefully documented. At the same time, another team of detectives began knocking on doors throughout the neighborhood. They wanted to know whether anyone had heard gunshots, whether anyone had noticed unfamiliar vehicles, whether security cameras had captured suspicious activity. In investigations like this, even the smallest observation can become the missing piece detectives are looking for. Hours turned into an entire day, then another. Behind the scenes, investigators were collecting surveillance footage from nearby businesses and homes. Cell phone records were being examined. Forensic evidence recovered from the house was sent for analysis. The search for the missing Mitsubishi Mirage continued. Little by little, detectives started seeing a clearer picture. One conclusion quickly became difficult to ignore. This didn't appear to be a random act of violence. Police began believing the victims had been deliberately targeted. That realization changed the direction of the entire investigation. If the attack had been planned, someone likely knew exactly who would be inside that home. That meant detectives needed to identify not only who had committed the murders, but also why. Then, after days of searching, investigators received the break they had been hoping for. The missing red Mitsubishi Mirage had finally been located. When investigators finally located the missing red 2020 Mitsubishi Mirage, they knew they were one step closer to answering the questions that had haunted Jackson since the morning of June 28th. The vehicle wasn't just another missing car anymore. It was evidence. Every inch of it had the potential to tell detectives what had happened after the murders and, more importantly, who had been involved. Crime scene investigators carefully examined the Mitsubishi, looking for fingerprints, DNA, ballistic evidence, and anything else that could connect the vehicle to the people responsible. At the same time, detectives continued reviewing surveillance footage, interviewing witnesses, and following every tip that came in from the public. The investigation was moving quickly, but investigators knew they couldn't afford to rush. Building a murder case isn't just about making an arrest. It's about gathering enough evidence to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, exactly who committed the crime. As more evidence was collected, detectives began identifying people they believed were connected to the murders. Then came another major development. Police attempted to stop a vehicle linked to the investigation. Instead of pulling over, the driver fled. A pursuit followed before officers successfully stopped the vehicle and took 2 men into custody. The suspects were identified as 28-year-old Cornelius Carter and 26-year-old Jordan Carter. According to police, officers also recovered 3 firearms from the vehicle during the arrests. Those weapons were seized and sent for forensic testing as investigators worked to determine whether any of them had been used during the murders. The arrests marked a significant breakthrough, but investigators made it clear that their work was far from over. Detectives continued interviewing witnesses and analyzing evidence collected from the crime scene, the stolen vehicle, and the suspects. As more information came together, authorities announced additional arrests connected to the investigation, reinforcing their belief that more than one person had played a role in what happened that night. Police also shared something that answered one question while creating another. They said this attack was not random. Investigators believed the victims had been specifically targeted. That statement immediately led people to ask the obvious question.
Why?
Unfortunately, that answer has never been fully revealed to the public. Investigators have not publicly disclosed a motive, and they have also not explained the exact relationship between the suspects and the victims. While rumors quickly spread across social media, police repeatedly urged the public not to rely on speculation. Cases like this often generate countless theories online. Some people become convinced they know exactly what happened. Others claim to have inside information. But the reality is very different. The only people who truly know everything that happened inside that house are the people who were there. And because 3 innocent people lost their lives, many of those answers may never be known outside a courtroom. As the investigation continued, prosecutors reviewed the evidence gathered by detectives. The suspects were charged with capital murder. Because one of the victims was a 2-year-old child, the case immediately became one of the most serious criminal prosecutions possible under Mississippi law. When the suspects appeared before a judge, bond was denied. That meant they would remain in custody while the criminal case moved forward. For investigators, the arrests represented months of hard work beginning to pay off. For the victims' families, however, justice was only beginning. No arrest could bring Erica Weathersby back. No courtroom could replace Keyana Weathersby. And no sentence, no matter how severe, could ever give little Camari Givens the childhood that had been stolen from him. The murders left an emotional scar across Jackson. Churches prayed for the family. Community members expressed their grief online and in person. Many parents said the case hit especially hard because it involved such a young child. Police Chief Rochelle Brackney described the murders as one of the most horrific cases the department had investigated, particularly because of the death of Camari. Even experienced officers admitted that scenes involving children stay with investigators long after the crime scene has been cleared. As the legal process continues, many details are expected to be presented in court. That includes forensic evidence, witness testimony, and other information investigators have intentionally withheld from the public to protect the integrity of the case. Until then, there are still questions that remain unanswered. What exactly happened inside the home before the shooting? What events led up to that tragic night? And what motive was powerful enough to end 3 lives in such a brutal way? Those answers may come during future court proceedings, but until they do, it's important to separate confirmed facts from rumors. In high-profile cases, misinformation can spread faster than the truth, and it's always best to let the evidence speak for itself. One thing that isn't in dispute is the devastating impact this case had on everyone connected to it. 3 lives were lost. A family was forever changed. A community was left searching for answers. And a little boy who should have been growing up surrounded by love instead became one of the youngest victims of a crime that shocked an entire city. Cases like this force us to confront difficult questions about violence, accountability, and the consequences of the choices people make. Could this tragedy have been prevented? What drives someone to commit such an unimaginable act? And how do families ever begin to heal after experiencing a loss like this? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe investigators already know the full motive but are waiting to present it in court? What piece of evidence do you think will have the biggest impact during the trial? And what do you think justice should look like for the families of Erica Weathersby, Keyana Weathersby, and little Camari Givens? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Please remember that this case involves real people and grieving families, so let's keep the discussion thoughtful and respectful. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe.